This week's guest works with empaths to enhance their psychic abilities. Over the past 10 years, our guest has studied psychology, spirituality, and energy healing. She has developed different programs to help a range of clients in a variety of ways. Today, we are going to find out just what those are. Host of the Soul Essence podcast, psychotherapist, and psychic medium, I'd like to welcome Xandra Hawes to the show. How you doing?
Oh, thanks so much, Dylan. I'm doing so good. So glad to be here.
Yeah, and thanks for taking the time to do this today. We were talking
Absolutely.
off air, real excited to have another psychic medium on. I just always am curious, just kind of that whole thing. It's I've had quite a few on my show. It's been a while, but I just find it fascinating that a lot of the stuff kind of falls in line with each other. You know, these people may be like, for example, like in different parts of the world, have different backgrounds. But a lot of times when it comes to like spirituality or, maybe life after death and things like that, a lot of the stories or ideas and views are real similar.
hmm hmm Yeah, I like to think of like tapping into those energies almost like we all have a Wi-Fi station like on top of our head, right? And there's like all these different channels to kind of connect into. And the more sensitive or the more aware sort of we are, the more channels you can kind of tune into. And so I'm wondering, based off of what you're saying, right, of all these people that are tuning into things, are they all tuning into different frequencies, right? And getting the same information, but maybe there's dozens of channels in the same way that there's dozens of routes to healing sort of in a way there too. So I imagine there's a lot of us overlapping there, which is cool, right? We can make a map and kind of have a sense of like, ooh, like from a scientific perspective, like there's something that's repeatable here, right? So what's happening?
Yeah, and that to me, that just kind of maybe gives it some credibility. That's kind of,
hmm
my show, what I based it on originally was to kind of just understand things and maybe learn things a little bit better. And it
hmm
just, to me, it just maybe brings some validity or that there's something else going on, right? Other than just
hmm
what's in the norm.
hmm hmm Absolutely. And it's interesting too, because it seems like the way that people do it, some people seem to have like a map, right? Or some people are sort of just born with it, right? You can kind of open it up. And sometimes I'd be curious, did you have psychics on that have been psychic from birth, or is it something where an event kind of opens it up for them? I feel like there's different stories too.
Yeah, so I've had a few that have had like near death experiences and like kind
Yeah.
of open things up for them that way. And then I've also
hmm
had quite a few. I think the vast majority of them are like very young age. They
Yeah.
realized that they were seeing things that perhaps other people weren't seeing and
Yeah.
communicating with entities. So on that note, then kind of when did you discover your first discovery or start to realize that maybe you see things a little bit differently than others?
Yeah. I grew up in a household, just me, my mother, my father, pretty small, normal nuclear family. My mom was always very much so into spirituality, but more from like the scary movie perspective. So a lot of what I was experiencing growing up fell into this not necessarily like I'm excited for the information, like to me, because of the programming of watching scary movies, right? Or watching more of the fear based around those kind of abilities. I was always like, how do I shut this off? Because it was kind of like I was tapping into a frequency, but it didn't feel exciting at first. It felt like overwhelming in a way. And so I grew up feeling really, really sensitive, but I never used the word psychic to describe it. I just always felt very, very sensitive, like very, very empathic, could feel other people's emotions and their shifts. That's why I help so many people in that realm now, because there's a lot of folks that have felt overwhelmed their whole lives. Right. And it's really hard to be in the body and really hard to engage with other people because they're so able to pick up on energy. So that's what I call like a certain type of psychic abilities where you can sense and feel into things. But when I was younger, I would see things, hear things. I mean, we had a ghost in our house for years and years that would slam doors. She would not let me listen to anything besides the Beatles. Like Hendrix, she hated. She would she would change the radio stations and It was annoying, or it was scary at first, and then I just got mad. I was like, I get to listen to the music that I'd like to listen to. So it started off as like being kind of frustrating in different ways, and had a really difficult experience where actually this kind of ghost in our house really invaded my space, like really too closely. And that kind of opened things up. I'm really grateful for it now. But instead of being fearful of those things, my mom, I went to her and I was like, this crazy kind of entity really invaded my space. Like, I don't feel safe. I don't feel protected. Like, I don't know what to do with all this stuff. And so, luckily, she took me to a psychotherapist and a psychic. She took me to both realms, hence kind of where I'm landing now in terms of doing the healing work that I do. But that's sort of where it all started. It definitely wasn't in this like super lovely, beautiful sort of way. And I'm a big believer that psychic abilities, you tap into a lot of different things, but it's important to learn how to tune it so that you're tuning in what you want to tune into versus just sort of being like a passive receiver of information that doesn't necessarily help you in that kind of way. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's valid. Going back to the ghost real quick. Now, did
Mhm.
this spirit have like an attachment to the house, or why do you think it was visiting that same location all the time? Or was it stuck
Yeah.
there or something? What was going on?
Yeah, it was strange because I could see and hear footprints, right? So I grew up like footsteps down the hallway. I could see things in the corner of my room and I just really tried to block it out. And then eventually when the entity sort of came into my space, I could hear her voice and I was like, it's a woman that's trying to talk to me and tell me her name. And so when we went to the psychic, I was like, I don't know who this woman is. And so she actually did a reading, and we lived in Farmington in Minnesota. So lots and lots of like suburban farm, lots of history. We live in a place that the ancient and native peoples of that land used to call the Big Woods. So very sacred woods area. And then they cleared all of it when a lot of folks that were colonizers came over and then created farmland. And so she was like this woman, she told us that she was from kind of the late 1800s area, and there was a huge accident on the farm where her son died, and she blamed herself and didn't believe that she deserved to cross over or leave that space, or was kind of in that purgatory kind of energy. So she actually felt bound to that land and that space. And so she connected in with me because I could see her. So to her and her energy field, really sensitive psychic people to ghosts and other beings kind of look like lighthouses. It's like when they're seeing and sensing, it's almost something in your energetic field that says, I can pick up on your energy, sort of in a way there. And so I think she hung out around me because she knew I was there and could sense her. And so, right, it's almost like attention, like someone wanting attention or wanting help. And so I think she tried to communicate with me because of that, as my sort of understanding of it.
That raises an interesting question that perhaps maybe you have the answer to, maybe not. But so like our higher self,
Mhm.
when we move on, we kind of supposedly return to that or to source.
Mhm.
How does when somebody passes and then they stay attached to a location or they can't move on, they have difficulty moving on. Is there still part of them that like maybe your conscious energy, does it still return to your higher self and source, or is
Mhm.
it really stuck here?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. When I started studying this work, it put me on a massive, massive healing journey. So from basically the last 10 years has been more clinical master's professional work, but even before that, more as like a self-learning sort of journey. I started taking all these classes because mediumship came so easily to me. It was something that just I could tap into that kind of stuff. And I was like, how do I help people, right, that are stuck here? And why are they stuck here? So I started studying the Sandra Ingerman tradition, which has a lot to do with shamanic journeying and more of these earth kind of land rituals. And I learned what's called psychopumping is her sort of word for it. And psychopumping is literally where you learn how to cross beings over. And I'm really, really good at it because of my background in psychotherapy. I can actually sit down and sit with a being and then literally kind of have a therapeutic conversation around and kind of get answers from that around why are you here, or what do you need, or what are you fearful. And sometimes what I've found, because I ended up talking to this being in the house space, is there's so much guilt. It's almost like And I think sometimes we do this. Sometimes we get stuck here, like even in our own lives, and we kind of loop. You know, when you're like, you're thinking about something and your mind has a really hard time letting it go, and we make ourselves kind of sick with that energy. It seems to me that sometimes beings where the body leaves and the soul kind of sense gets locked here, we always have a higher self elsewhere. There's definitely that part that is with source, and they're kind of craving that in a way, but they're not, they're looped into this sort of fear and doubt space, and they get really lost over time here. The from what I can understand, the frequency of earth is so much different from there. And so spirits, typically like human spirits, need a body kind of to be here, to move around, to be able to work through things, right? Emotions are such a huge, valid, beautiful thing for our bodies. And so it's very hard for beings without a body to be able to kind of move through a space easily. They get stuck like harder. Like a lot of people give ghosts way more like powerful credibility than they actually have, you know, in a way. Like, oh, like all these scary movies are so scared of ghosts in a way. And, you know, it takes a lot of energy just to move a cup like on a table is what I've experienced through talking to them. So I have a sense from the conversations that I've had when I talked with her, she just kept showing me a picture of her son, right? In this very almost manic sort of way, I would say, like clinically, like this very like upset, like, I don't know where my son is, like I don't know what to do, like that kind of like almost hysterical a little bit energy. And so I calmed down and I say, "What's your son's name?" And she shows me a picture of him, and then I can show her a picture of him on the other side and say, "You need to go, you know, he's over there." And when you show a ghost, for me, a picture of their family and the beings, they immediately go, "Oh my God, what am I doing here?" It's almost like you're giving them a ticket to say, like, get on this airplane. Like you're in the wrong place. You need to go this way. And so it just takes a little bit to hook them into that frequency, and they pass pretty easily unless there's guilt or fear around that. And I have a ton of stories around that. So we can go into that, but I don't want to leap too far off the lily pad in that area.
That that sounds kind of like a terrible existence. You
Hmm.
almost feel bad. I do feel bad for him, because
Yeah,
you would think, once this life's over, I mean, the goal would be to move on and
right.
to start a new journey or a new adventure rather than be stuck here miserable over something. Uh,
But
so I think, perhaps some of the work you're doing, and others, I've heard of others moving spirit on, is, pretty good stuff. I mean, it's pretty positive, pretty critical for helping those that are perhaps lost. What put you on the path of helping empathic people? Was it dealing with the psychotherapy and the psychic medium when you were younger? What were they? Was it one and the same? Were they one and the same person, kind of like yourself? Did they,
mm,
or was it two different? You were seeing a psychic medium and you were seeing a psychotherapist.
mhm. Well, so for me personally, when I went to the psychotherapist, it didn't necessarily help that much. Like I could move emotions out, but there wasn't a lot of sense of like, how do you work with this? Like, how do you tap into your own trust? So for me, it became a really big journey around like, how do I trust myself? Like, how do I tap into my kind of self trust, knowing power? Because especially with psychic abilities, it's so etheric. In a way, it's so easy for the ego to jump in and criticize and say, oh, that's wrong. Oh, that's probably not right. It really overrides spiritual information. And so my journey has been like, how do you shut that off? How do you have like a healthy skepticism, right? That like ask questions. But if your ego comes in and is super mean to you and is like, "Oh, you're wrong. You're not smart enough. You're whatever." That is all mean programming about not trusting yourself. And so my journey has been like, how do I tap into this information but with curiosity, right? How do you get curious around like, "Oh, I wonder how that works," or that. So I've spent the last, I don't even know, 15 years or so working with how do I understand that? And so that's why a lot of what I help, and most people do this a lot, right? Whatever we heal through or whatever we grow through, it becomes this sense of like, oh, I want to offer that to people, or I can really see people there with deep compassion. So, one of the reasons why I help empathic and sensitive people is because a lot of times they're very psychic, or they just read energy at higher levels, and they haven't learned, how do I be in the body in a safe way? And how do I tap into that core essence that is so healing and like an inner compass? So that way, when I'm feeling this sensitivity, it actually feels like a gift, because a lot of people that are sensitive think about having to defend themselves more, right? Like more of, if I'm more sensitive and empathic, I have to put down more boundaries. That's true, sort of, in a way, but at the same time, if you're really sensitive and you can feel into energies, you can heal yourself faster, right? So if you are sensitive and you can feel into other energies, if you we flip that around and you can feel into certain plants or different spirits or healing energy or elements, you actually have the capacity to shift your space faster if you think about it in a empowered, trusting way where you decide what energy that you're taking in certain way. So I like to help people flip it rather than like, oh, I'm sensitive and this is a bad thing, right? Like, how do we actually allow you to be an even more empowered healer with your abilities? And that's what I've learned over the last, how many years, is doing that work. And then the psychotherapy and the psychic medium is that sometimes mental health issues, the doubt, trauma from our past, attachment styles, all of that can get in the way of trusting our innate abilities. And so that ego is really strong and really doubtful. And so we have to work with releasing that energy before strengthening the connection to spirit, because the left brain, that kind of skepticism or mean part of ourselves, has been too attacking on our psyche. And so it doesn't allow the other energy to come in. So that's why I braid them both together a lot, because sometimes we need both.
Yeah, that's well put. I think the ego perhaps is shaped or formed by social norms, perhaps. I don't know. I'm just
Mm.
what are your, what's your take on that? Because I get what you're saying about the ego and telling yourself that perhaps it's not true, or doubting yourself, or telling yourself that you're crazy for thinking these things or feeling these things, or not fully
Mhm.
embracing or accepting what you're experiencing on an energetic level. Do you think that society kind of shapes that from an early age, or is it just something that kind of genetically our egos are just like that?
I think it's a really good question. Sometimes, and maybe you can imagine this too, but was thinking one day about, like one of my first overwhelming experiences and how I automatically thought it was bad. And I was like, why did I automatically think it was bad? Like, and I was like, what if I had never seen a scary movie, right? What if I had never seen The Shining, right? Or The Ring, or, whatever scary movies. I was like, if I could have not had any of that programming, that tuning into another being was bad, would it actually have been really easy, right? Or would it have actually been a good experience? Or would I actually have had curiosity or boundaries sort of around it? But there is so much programming, and I say programming in terms of culture, in terms of media especially. There's so much that we get hooked into because part of us, and a natural awesome part of us, is just looking to create a map, right? Like, what's the best way to live life? What are the best values to have that are going to allow me to be successful? And so we're just always taking that energy in, right, in a way. And but your question, right, is, does ego come in right away? Does ego development happen? And that's a huge psychology question, right, around like, how is ego developed? What's healthy ego, right? Like all of the Freud and all of those sort of pieces around that. And you know I'm also curious, most people I meet, this is not their first life, right? So it's like, how much is coming through from a previous life? How much are you working with? And then also from a genetics perspective, there are so many studies coming out that so much of who we are is passed down through our DNA. And if there are certain traumatic events, it changes our DNA, right? Even in the same way that, your
Yeah.
ancestors made of, oh yeah, go
No,
ahead.
I'm
You
just
not
no,
it.
no, continue, please. That was, yeah, I find that fascinating. I've discovered that it's been a few years, but it's just interesting how that it can be like actually in our DNA, that, things from previous generations.
Mhm.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I think, and I mean, you might know more about this than I do around like how genetically, like how they've passed down, like if someone has if someone's family system has really struggled with poverty throughout generations and generations and generations, there's a certain amount of stress that the body has had to go through, whether certain work, whether certain mental pieces, right? If we don't have what we need, even on like a chakra sort of level, I work with the energetic chakra system, and like not having what we need or not having our needs met a lot of times sits in the first or second chakra, in the root or the sacral chakra. And so if your body is constantly processing energy or holding energy in those spaces, you can pass down diseases, right? If there are blockages in the body, we all hold energy in certain places. A lot of people, especially sensitive people, will hold it in their stomach. A lot of people with sensitivity won't be able to digest things very well. They get stomach aches. There's this energy where it sits there. So if you imagine, if I spend my whole life, right, really not having good digestive health or holding energy there or constricting my stomach, my DNA, right, that I pass down is used to having that pattern. And it's used to functioning in that way. Maybe I only ate certain things because of it, right? Maybe I only ate certain nutrients. So then my body learns that it has higher levels of this or higher levels of that, right? The hormones. I mean, it's just nuts how what you're doing now impacts the future if you decide to carry on and, procreate in terms of generations. But what your grandfather ate impacts you. Well, how your grandmother dealt with her stress and where she lived impacts you. So it's so interwoven, like in that way too. But there's a lot of studies around generational trauma and how that impacts people as well. Yeah.
That's so fascinating. Um, to your point too, I think, you had mentioned like about the scary movies, perhaps, shaping, your view of a certain situation or just how you feel about certain things. I wonder that too, like in psychotherapy or even in the medical field on just kind of how they look at things, and perhaps there needs to be more of, I'm not saying just solely focused on spirituality, but I think spirituality comes into play even in like when health is concerned. And I
Mhm.
don't think it's not talked about enough. I've had, a few experts on my show, but I mean, like, I think for the most part, generally speaking, it's kind of like by the book materialistic view of how to treat people with medicine.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I'm curious about how the medical field is continuing to shift. I think I have a master's degree in contemplative psychotherapy and Buddhist psychology. So a lot of my mental health is really informed by Buddhist psychology. But even before that, I have a graduate degree certificate in looking at holistic health studies, which is the intersection between Eastern and Western medicine. Because I was like, what is this important part, right? Like, what is this midway point where, yes, it's important, right? If you get strep throat, right, or you need antibiotics, like how do we really honor like the body being able to be at health, right, and getting balanced or needing something to come in and move it. But what is the spiritual component? Like, how does our mental health impact certain ways that our body's functioning? And I think of spirituality, connecting to spirit, meaning we're connecting with source, but we're connecting with this sense of joy and love and care and knowing and trust, these really beautiful, almost like the sun inside of us. And there has to be something where, and that's sort of where I think the idea of miracles come from, right? Is where people sort of connect in with this higher energy and all of a sudden it heals them. I think that's why people are fascinated. Like Jesus was able to, just touch people and they were healed because of his, bright frequency. But I'm also curious, when people believe in that energy, when they say yes to that energy, was it really Jesus who healed people, or was it him being a lighthouse and people seeing it in themselves and all of a sudden they were able to heal it? Because I don't necessarily believe that someone can just walk up and heal you, but if they hold a frequency and you're able to see that in yourself and really tune to that, can you actually heal yourself in that way? That was a little bit of a tangent sort
Yeah,
of
no,
there, but
that's
I'm
good. That's
curious.
good. And that's something I've talked about often on my shows. I'm fascinated with a lot of the work that a lot of these people are doing as far as being able to manifest your health through the power of thought and positive thinking. Um, And it's interesting, and I buy into a lot of it because I mean, there's just so many cases and stories of people that have maybe overcome, issues with their back or cancer or whatever it be, and it's very interesting. You talk about a person's soul essence being like magic. What is
Mhm.
can you tell my listeners, what is soul essence to you? Can you maybe define it, and then you know, why is it magic?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love the craze of more and more people also using the word magic. Like I was watching an NBA like game last year, and one of the coaches with Steph Curry was like, he just has this magical aura about him. And I was like, did someone just say that on national television? This yes. Like bring in more lingo about magical aura. Thank you, Harry Potter, for making that more approachable for people. But anyway, I think of soul essence to me is just soul essence, and there's a lot of other words for it too. That's my sort of word for it, but soul essence, chi, life force, spirit, soul. Soul essence is this innate inner part of you that carries on through lifetime after lifetime. And so this energetic part that chooses certain lives, that chooses certain lessons, that continues to kind of go through so many things and become more and more aware. It's like, I think they said, like, I think the Buddha, they said, was supposed to have 800 and something lives before he became the Buddha. This sense of being able to hold such a deep energy of compassion, because the more experiences that we have, the more things that we go through, the less, I don't know if you notice this, even as I get older and older, when I see someone going through something, rather than getting upset, I'm like, oh, wow, like I've seen that. I've been through that. I have compassion for that. There's a sense that the more we go through and the more we experience, the more we're able to hold a frequency of care and of love in a way. And that's what I believe the soul is made of. And I think that's why so many people go through some really difficult lifetimes. In a way, there's so much learning that comes through struggle in a way there too. And so soul essence is that goodness and that innate part. And to me, soul essence and psychic are almost the same thing. Psychic abilities just mean your ability to tune into that energy because it has a higher consciousness. It it's in a different dimension, which different dimensions run at different energies. There's way more information, right? Like some of the videos were like 1D to 2D to 3D, where all of a sudden you can start seeing inside other forms. There's way more information. And so I think of your soul essence as being this life force energy that runs really brightly and it's with us all the time. And when you connect to that, it's like connecting to your own encyclopedia, or some people will call it the Akashic records as well, of where you've been and things that you've learned.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I like your point on, as you get older and you've have more experience that you can kind of look back on and maybe see somebody who maybe does something in a way that maybe back in the day or when you were younger would have pissed you off or offended you, but you're able to kind of see through that and pick up on that, well, they're just having a struggle because of this or that, which is great in a lot of ways, but it kind of bums me out, man,
Hmm.
because like we're having this great life and we're experiencing all this stuff and we're learning all this stuff, but it's like it's just so short. And then like
Mm.
it's kind of like your slate gets wiped clean and you start over, which is cool in a way and exciting in a way, but in some ways it's kind of like I feel like you lose some of that, maybe perhaps what you learned or understood in one lifetime to the next.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that? Or do we carry a lot of stuff over and kind of are able to use it into another lifetime?
Mhm. I honestly think it's people's openness to it. If you're a person that starts saying every day, like, this isn't my only life. Like if you get in your car every day, something as simple as small as holding onto the steering wheel and going, I'm going to remember throughout the day that I'm a soul and I've had different experiences. There are reasons why I understand things I've never been through. There are reasons why I have compassion, or I know what it's like. And it's not just your ability to think or understand it. It's a true sense of trusting that you might have gone through something similar. And so just by saying, I'm a soul, right? Or I'm going to explore, right? Those things, more information, more awareness will start coming through, but it depends on your availability to that. I always think of our soul essence is very, even like a lot of people will say, like, I want to tap into my spirit guides and things like that. Like guides in our soul essence is very respecting of us. If you're there, like high frequency beings are not going to like try to override your boundaries or bombard you in the same way that people that respect your boundaries just in human form, right, aren't going to like come up, right, and kind of invade your space or insist on things. So it's more so up to us, if you want to reclaim those memories and that understanding, to start putting yourself in the mental and the emotional space to say, this might not be my only life. I might have been elsewhere and I'm available. I intend to learn more and to take that information in. And by just saying the word I intend for this energy to come in stronger. I know that I am this. It will start coming in waves. You'll start finding yourself drawn to certain things. You might start having certain dreams. You might be like, wow, I just dreamed, that I struggled, but I lived in this, era, but it felt so real. Like I just know it. It might sit in your heart space. You'll start getting that information, but it's respectful of you. It's not going to bombard you if you're like, nope. In this life, I have clients that are like very sensitive and they're like, I don't care. I want to be rich. I don't care about my soul. I'm like, okay, you know, like that sounds good, but you're also really sensitive. So how do you process this energy? You don't want to bring your soul in this life. That's okay. And how do you be rich in an ethical way? Like sometimes I have those conversations because it's up to us, right? How much you want to take in. So it doesn't have to be this, pressured thing or you failed, right? If you don't realize that information. But something you're saying is really right around like it's a bummer, right? How many things we maybe go through multiple times that maybe we wouldn't have to if we were really aware and awake and open to that information.
Yeah, and I like your, your thought of, looking at life a little differently and perhaps just looking at it as, I'm a soul that's lived multiple lifetimes, at least for me. And this, this might not be for everybody. I don't want to speak for anybody else, but like once because I do that, I do that with myself often, pretty much probably daily. And what it does though, it kind of minimizes the anxiety of my mortality.
Mhm.
It helps me to look at life in a way that's more like I think a small child would, like that everything's kind of magical and it's just strange. It kind of changes your thinking in that way. And there was another point I wanted to make. Um, I lost it. Damn it. But I don't know. It just seems to help with things like that. Oh, another thing is too is like it helps me with not being so stressed out over stuff that you maybe don't have a lot of control over. Your
Mhm.
situation, something happens, and you can kind of just stay in the moment and just tell yourself, look, it's going to be all right. I'm okay for now. It's not that big of a deal. I just take it one day at a time.
I love that you're accessing that frequency. It feels healing in a way, right? Around especially around the control, because there's so much programming in our society that if you're doing everything right, you're controlling everything, which is so opposite. Like there's so much you can't control in a way. And so for you saying like if something's happening, how to hold the higher perspective, right? Of like, if I get upset about this, is it really that helpful? Right? Can I pull myself back and kind of like you're saying, remind yourself around like, how can I find joy in this? Or like, how do I not have to take things so seriously in a way? It sounds like you said anxiety goes down, right? Different sort of emotions maybe that are difficult. It also sounds, I don't know if you said this, but gratitude coming in more around like, oh, I'm grateful to be here. I've been here before. I'll come back again and learn more. But how do I be grateful for what's here too?
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I think that's very important, and it's a great way to live life. Just to be grateful for the things you do have, and to
Mhm.
understand that there's people in other situations that perhaps not as fortunate as yours, And I mean, we all have our struggles and we all have our, our things, but I think a lot of ways is the perspective you put on that struggle is what really kind of can make or break a situation or your life.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, there seems to be, and I run into this a lot, especially being a psychotherapist. There's so many folks that I work with that are like, I'm not enough because I don't have this happening for me, right? There's a lot of comparison that happens, unfortunately, especially in the United States, around this sense of needing to be or hit certain markers at certain times. There's not a lot of freedom to just be able to explore and play. There's a lot of pressure. And it's interesting too, because some of that seems to be changing in some ways. My office is a couple blocks away from the University of Colorado. And so I see a variety of different students from there. And so many of them are like, I'm helping them academically try to figure out how to move forward. And they're like, I don't know. A lot of them are like, I don't know if I believe in this place where like I need to spend all this money to learn this thing, to go into this place where it doesn't matter to me. There's this heart sense that's starting to develop for people around like wanting purposeful work, wanting work where they get to be more in joy, where they get to be more creative in a way. And I don't know where that's going to take the world, because it doesn't, sometimes we have to learn really difficult lessons. Like I've had so many jobs that were not my favorite job, and I'm grateful for them, right? Like taught me how to do this, taught me not that everything we do is not have to, it has to be so easy and fun and playful in a way. But I'm really, really curious, like usually our soul essence comes through when we're feeling excited or we're feeling joyful or we're grateful or we're saying nice things to ourselves too. um that is one thing, like a lot of people are like, I'm not happy with what I'm doing, and I'm not like, are you sure you're not happy with what you're doing? Are you talking to yourself in a mean way while you're doing to these things? And that's why it's actually really difficult to tap into the better things, because of the way you're speaking to yourself around these things too. But anyway, side tangent. I'm curious where the world's going to go in terms of what really puts us in the place to tap into this essence piece that you're speaking of, that knowing piece. And how do we find meaningful work that aligns in that supports us? Like, I'm curious if it's possible.
I mean, I think in perhaps certain groups it will be. I'm not
Mhm.
sure if, the whole world will get on board with that. It would be great if they did, I think. It could maybe change the world in ways that we're unfamiliar with, but I'm not so sure that that's the goal. I mean, maybe it is. I don't know, but I'm just
Mhm.
saying that I think that there needs to be kind of a good and bad, or that's kind of a
Mhm.
bad term because I'm not sure anything's good or anything's bad, so to speak. But there kind of needs to be that though, right? Like that yin and the yang of,
Mhm.
so the
Mhm.
light and the dark, so that you can have the
Mhm.
experience of both, and you can understand the experience of both.
Mhm.
Because without one,
Mhm.
then how do you know what light is if everything is just happy and joyful?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it reminds me of like most of us that are on a path to spirituality, a lot of people, it wasn't easy, right? Like it wasn't necessarily like a lot of the folks that I work with that are more spiritually inclined have pretty traumatic stories around like childhood or not being met in a certain way. And so that pushed them to have to go out and go, how do I heal myself? Like, how do I explore this? How do I find this book? How do I learn this energy healing? How do I get closer to the earth? Right? How do I change my diet? Like, there's a lot of the times the hardest parts of our lives really push us to change and to develop and to look for those healing pieces. And it's sweet because, at least for me, there's a lot of joy around like, oh, I really love how I was able to get through this, right? It creates this trust about being able to get through things. And so, again, not that everything has to be easy, sort of in a way. I'm just curious about how people will start bringing creativity more into their lives in a way so that people can find more joy. I just talk to a lot of people that are like, I don't know if they're happy with, like, what's worked in past generations necessarily around, like, most people I talk to are like, "I can't imagine getting a job and working the same place for 30 years. I don't think I wanna do that. It doesn't challenge me enough." And I'm like, "Okay, well, what does that mean?" Right? Like, where do you wanna go? What do you wanna learn? And maybe it's challenging because sometimes joy starts with being challenged first, right? Rather than just, like, everything with a beautiful, fluffy pink silver lining
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, and I think, you raised a good point too. You're talking about challenges and things of, people overcoming things. And I'm not sure that we have a lot of decision coming into a lifetime, but I
Mhm,
do feel that there are maybe certain aspects or things that you're planning on experiencing or going through when you enter into a lifetime. And I
mhm,
look at people that are like maybe extremely handicapped or someone who has maybe Down syndrome, and I look at them and I just think to myself, like, that's a brave soul. That is a warrior. That is someone who
mhm,
is just wow. I mean, it's I don't know. I don't know how to express how I feel about it. I wish I could demonstrate it through words, but I can't. It's
mhm.
almost it's getting me kind of worked up just talking about it. But what are your thoughts on any of that? Like, I mean, do you think that perhaps souls have plans to like go through things like that in a lifetime? Maybe they don't have know exactly what it's going to be, but they understand that there's going to be this major obstacle that maybe 90% of the people on earth aren't going through it in that and in that time, but they're going to go through it.
Mhm. I think it's a really good question, and it like, for instance, that's where I go when you're talking about it, is I go, like, into my own sort of experience, and for instance, a lot of this work that I've done had a lot to do with, like, well, where do my roots come from and what's my ancestry, right? How do I learn depending on what I'm going through? Did anyone else go through it? And even my great-grandmother on my mother's side, back then, they didn't really have words to describe mental health or certain conditions in a way. So when you talk about having certain Down syndrome or certain learning disabilities or even physical limitations on the body, my great grandmother fell into that category. And it's interesting because when I look at her as a soul and I look at her energy and what she had to go through, there's a similar energy that you speak of like, wow, there's such bravery, right? Going into a system where it's already hard enough to kind of figure out your way, but you're saying, like, okay, sometimes I'll give the example when we wake up in the morning and we have everything that we need, enough sleep, enough food, like a good day, whatever, we have all the resources. We wake up with 10 spoons. But sometimes when we're going through really hard things, we didn't get enough sleep, we didn't have food, financial, whatever, maybe we wake up and we only have 7. And so we only have 7 to operate from. And so sometimes when you're talking about someone waking up with a physical limitation, right? They might not wake up with as many spoons, right? Because it's harder to get through their day. It takes more energy to do certain things. So there is a warriorness around like, wow, you decided to not be able to walk as easily as other people. And how is that going to impact all of these different things? So there is, at least for me, the sense of like, wow, such bravery. But there's also a sense of neutrality around like, wow, if we take the framework that this person chose this, how do I see their bravery and their warriorship and this deep desire to learn and to engage in this way? How do I really honor it? And how do I also really honor this person's brightness, like in a way too, and all the other things that they're adding into this world? Because by them deciding not to match people outside of them in the same way, it's also a mirror for other people to learn about themselves. So it's like they're teaching in multiple ways. They're not only teaching and honoring like this capacity in their own life, but they are really, really creating a lot of more creativity in our world around people being able to understand things in different ways or communicate or see things. So they're bringing such amazing value to the diversity of our
Yeah,
planet.
like a ripple effect
Yeah.
on yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And that um just reminded me, and perhaps this is where I got that thought from, was I had a close relative who committed suicide, and I was talking to a psychic one time and she kind of tapped into, you know, him, and he had done so many things. He had been through so much. He had lost his mom at a young age. He was convicted of manslaughter, and it was accidental, but like, he did that. He had substance abuse issues, but he was this great person who lived life to the fullest, super intelligent guy, and um just very caring, and would do anything for anybody. And it was interesting because she had mentioned that, he had lived his life like he was trying to live 5 lifetimes in 1 lifetime, which I found interesting. Um,
Mhm.
so, uh,
When you heard her say that, did that resonate? Were you
yeah,
like, I could see that. I can
yeah,
see how that happened.
yeah, looking back on his life, I mean, he was in the military. I mean, he just did so many things. Like, looking back on his life, I can totally see what she was talking about. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, I get that. I don't know. But
Yeah.
go ahead.
I just wonder, almost like a video game, right? When you start a video game, you can decide what level to start on in a way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with deciding what level you want to start on. But similar to what you're saying, sometimes I see people pick hard. They're like, I want to grow through this. I want to learn how to be here. I want to learn, how to work with anger. I want to learn how to trust myself and love myself. If some people pick really, really difficult levels, and sometimes it's too hard to be here, and there's no shame in that. There's a lot of love around, like, okay, like, you picked a really, really hard level. Like, how do we honor you and everything you had to go through in a way? So when you're talking about this being, I kind of can feel myself sending a soul hello around, like, hey, like, you're allowed to rest too. In a way, you're allowed to come here and rest and not work so hard, and like, you took some big things on. So how to be, kind of honor that courage to be able to go through so much in one point. It's a lot.
You had mentioned, you're into like Buddhism and things like that. Can you maybe
Mm.
touch a little bit on what's your take on karma?
It's a good question around karma, and there's one of the traditions that I grew up studying is a particular psychic tradition that comes from BPI, or the Berkeley Psychic Institute in California, that first started up in about the 70s kind of area. And it's interesting how they work with karma and how they see karma. And a lot of it has to do, in their perspective, around very similar to Buddhism in some ways, around like, it has to do with our intention. It has to do with how we are impacting the people around us. And it's tricky to be able to put a like badge on, this was good karma or bad karma. Like, it feels too weird to make a dichotomy around that, because sometimes the things that we offer to other people that cause pain are so important in the long run for that person to have made a switch. Right. So like, if you have
That's
two
interesting.
people, oh yeah, say more.
Oh, just that I guess I never looked at karma in that light, but you make a very good point.
I'm just I'll say, we take the example, right? Say someone's in a relationship with someone else, right? And say someone decides that they don't want to be with that other person, and maybe they don't handle it well. Maybe they don't communicate well. Maybe they decide to spend time with other people, right? There's all these different ways, but say this relationship ends, and one person, right, is like, wow, you're the worst person in the world. Like, that's such bad karma that you didn't treat me sort of correctly. But say the person that leaves that relationship, right, and is mad at the other person for what they've done, looks at themselves afterwards and has a mirror up and is just like, wow, when I was with that person, I was drinking all the time and that didn't make me feel good. Maybe I've always been interested in learning about gardening, and yet I never did that. Or maybe I've always wanted to read all these books, but I just kept watching Netflix with them, right? Like, there's a mirror around that person. You look at yourself and go, did I like myself then? And so maybe that's actually the catalyst for that person to actually start doing certain things in their life. And all of a sudden they turn their life around in a way where they're excited or they're proud of themselves. It's these lift off sort of moments in a way. So sometimes we have this sense of karma around like, well, this person did something bad to me, right? So they're going to have to like experience that in a different life. But it's like, how many things, the people that have hurt us or done things, how has it really been a catalyst to our own healing in a way? And can we forgive that person? If that person could forgive themselves and we could forgive them, does it actually equal out and not actually have to even exist as karma anymore? So if we could live in that place around forgiveness and love and care around the things that happen to us and actually forgive people, perhaps this sort of karmic idea of debt, right? Where we're repenting, quote unquote, in different lives or going through hard things because we deserve it in some sort of way. I don't know if I buy that quite yet. I don't know if I believe in that quite yet. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good example. And that leads me to the thought I've heard, psychics talk about like soul groups and
Hmm.
how, and I don't know how much of this is true, obviously, but I don't even know, I'm not saying I necessarily buy in, but their point that, we have these soul groups and we're up there deciding on kind of like what role that we're going to play in each other's life at that moment. Oftentimes some some soul that we're close with is going to choose a life that's going to be maybe conflicting or cause issues or pain in that other person's life, to,
Hmm.
like you said, to teach them, to give them lessons, to help them to
Hmm.
understand things better.
Hmm. Do you have that experience where like you'll be, maybe you've been in a grocery store or you've been driving in your car, or maybe you ended up like going to some sort of class, right? Or experience something where you don't really know someone, but there's something in your space, almost like a light switch, where you're like, that person's face looks familiar, but you can't figure out, you're like, no, they don't look like that person, or there's a color they're wearing, or there's something in your space where you're like, I just automatically feel connected to this person. Maybe you never see them again. Maybe you have an awkward conversation, right? But there's something around like, I know this person's energy. There's something in my space that clicks on, right? You've had that, see you nodding. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've had that to the point where like maybe the first time you meet someone, you get that like you said, the light switch thing, but then it turns
Mhm.
out they turn out to be like a person that's involved in my life. Maybe not forever, but maybe even just for a short amount of time or for a couple years or whatever. And you
Mhm.
know, that's interesting that you say that. Yeah, there's been a few, and I'm
Yeah.
sure the anybody out there listening would probably have had similar experiences, I would think.
Yeah. And this is just like a kind of a thinking perspective. But if we imagine, right, say, let's just go for an easy number. Say you've had 10 lives before this, right? Doesn't matter where they've gone in the world, but just imagine, I know you live in the woods. I don't know if it's near other people in the woods, but
Yeah, it's just outside of Columbus, but it's in the
oh,
woods.
okay. Okay, okay. So, like, I didn't know if we were, like, into the wild status in terms of the woods, but if we sort of imagine, right, how many people you just bump into at the grocery store, or, like, how many people you can just see walking down the street or have simple conversations with, or, they drop a cup on the ground or their keys and you pick it up and you hand, like, how many people we interact with on a daily basis throughout our lives, throughout all the schooling that we have, your partner in second grade that like drew a dog, and you laughed at them, right? And they got sad and then, you apologize. I mean, all these little interactions that we have. If you've had 10 lives where all of that happened, you are bound to run into people that have been in your life all the time. And they might be in small ways. You might just get a feeling around like, huh, like, I don't know, that was cool. That person seemed nice, right? To the bigger hits around like, oh, this person feels more familiar, right? This might be someone that I had a really significant relationship with. Or if you feel yourself really withdrawn by someone, is that person a mirror to something in this life that you've resisted? Or is it something right beyond? And when you, at least I know for me, having more connection to my soul essence, I can ask those questions and I can get those answers more readily too. When you start aligning with that essence energy, it's aware of those things. So you can be like, is this a past life thing, or is this like something that I'm resisting in my current life, or I'm jealous over, or reminded me of this person? And you can feel a yes or no sort of into your space. So it could be both, could be either in a way. But I'm a big fan of we meet a lot of people in our lives, definitely have soul families in different ways.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. What is your thoughts on, have you like ever heard of like having jumping off points? Like of,
Mm.
where, I turn left here and, potential fatal car accident, or I decide I don't want to turn left because, I get this weird gut feeling I'm going to turn right and everything's okay. Is there, do you believe, is there like points where we can get off
Mm.
if our higher self wants to? No, and I'm not saying from the standpoint of who we are as a person, because most likely, we're here to just to live our life and experience, but on a higher self, they're saying, perhaps your lessons have all been learned, it's time to get off, or you
Mhm.
didn't learn what you were supposed to and you missed your opportunities in this life, so it's time to get off.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you call it like a jumping off point too. It reminds me there's a couple different psychics that I've loved and studied a long time, like in terms of their work. And Sylvia Brown is definitely a psychic that, popularized, excuse me, on Maury and things like that. But she has a book where she talks about how I think she says there are like 4 or 5 points where the soul kind of puts in around like, okay, like kind of check in points around like, do I want to be here? Do I not want to be here? Right? Is this the right time? Kind of pieces. And I haven't experienced like when I was reading it, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because it kind of aligns with near death experiences, sort of in a way, right? Where some
Yeah.
people have that. So, but I don't know if they need to nearly be that drastic, right? In a way, it could be literally where you are jet skiing, right? And you fall off the jet ski and a boat like narrowly misses you, right? And you're like, wow, I'm so glad that didn't happen. And you're like, oh yeah, my soul didn't want to leave, right? That wasn't a point where I wanted to go. Or most people, when they have those experiences, they're not like, dang, I'm so sad the boat missed, right? There's usually this sense of like, no, I'm feeling really good about being here. So I have the example you're talking about, like, do I go left or do I go right? I don't necessarily have the experience like, okay, if you go right, a car accident's gonna happen. But I'm also like kind of a lifer here. Like I eat really healthy. Like I'm gonna be living into my 90s. Like I've made it pretty clear that all my points are a no in terms of being here versus some people might have, yeah,
That's
like
good.
my yeah,
But
it's
no,
cool.
that's really good, because I have the exact opposite. I struggle to want to be here
Mm.
daily sometimes. I mean, I for the most part I want to be here. I'm not saying I'm suicidal or anything. I'm just saying that like there's time I have these thoughts of like, you know, how much longer do I have? Is it time? Do I need to do I need to be here anymore? Those kinds of things. But that's good that you've already planned and you've already saying, look, there's no getting off for me. I'm here till I'm 90. And I think that's beautiful and it's courageous of you.
I have a lot of compassion for what you just said around the like, man, because I will like I do have points sometimes where I'm like, wow, there's so much energy and there's so many things that are coming through. I guess for me, sometimes I sit back and I'm like, okay, is this me sometimes not necessarily like feeling overwhelmed, or is it just my sensitivity feeling into the world and caring so much that it's so easy for me to be like, wow, this is overwhelming. And so sometimes if I'm feeling that energy, at least, and I grew up, especially as a teenager, feeling that energy that you speak of on a daily basis, that's my curiosity is like, is it a part of you or are you one of those people that's sensitive that can really feel deeply into the world,
You
right?
mean
And wants
like
to
you
help.
pick up on the waitress that's pissed off at, because and you're like, oh, she's having a bad day. Let me try to help her out. Or just you walk into a room and there's just this mood and you're like, this is not a good place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're one of those humans. Let's just put you in that camp for a second. You're one of the sensitive, intuitive, probably psychic beings out there. And this world is going through a massive shift. It's huge in terms of people being like, am I going to be okay? And so if you're a person that can feel into all those energies, you have an amazing gift to be able to tap into the healing ones, but it's just a lot of energy that you run and it's tiring and it's exhausting. So those are the moments to be like, whew, like I have a really special gift and I'm really needed here. and how do I make sure that I give other people's energy back to them? That's another thing. Sensitive people, like, they sometimes absorb it because they want to help sort of in a way, but the tricky part is that sometimes people need all of their uncomfortable energy to actually make a change in their lives. So it's important when you feel into that information to be like, I'm going to send you a huge soul hello, but I can't take this on for you. I see you and I hope you get through it. But if you have that sensitivity, you have the opportunity to be a healing lighthouse, to hold that energy and to know that if you can tap into those things, man, you've got a superpower. You've got like a jetpack on your back that you can activate if you feel like it. But it's important to um, know that if you came in with those abilities, they are so, so needed here. It's just deciding to give people's energy back and checking in and being like, okay, am I exhausted or is the world exhausted? And I'm like plugged into like the exhaustion frequency right there. And just to make sure that your essence is really leading the way. It's sometimes it's really hard to differentiate, I feel like sometimes.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think what you're saying is it's important to be self-aware of it at all times, because you're not gonna, if you're not checking in with yourself and looking at it from that perspective, you're just gonna take it on as it's your own.
You got it. Yeah, exactly. The waitress, the person in the room, the grocery store.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are going through a lot, but it's also loving them enough to say like, "Hey, I know that you're going through a lot and you're really strong and you're going to get through it and perhaps this is a healing journey that you need." So it's letting people have the lessons that they're learning and not trying to take them away from them as well, because sometimes our greatest healing journeys are the ones that make us feel purposeful too.
Wow. It's well said. Well,
Mm,
can you maybe tell the listeners kind of what are some of the services that you offer and the things that you're doing, and talk a little bit about
yeah,
your podcast?
yeah. My podcast is my podcast is silly. The first 5 minutes, all I do is babble. I always tell people, I'm like, skip the first 5 minutes. I would edit it out, but I'm one of those people that just like presses record. I record the whole thing and like that's just what it is.
Let it ride.
That
Yep, I'm the same way.
so my podcast, it's this kind of combination of I do a lot of mental health topics, but it's mental health from the spiritual. So looking at anger, looking at forgiveness, looking at some really big ones, looking at doubt, because naturally when people tap into their spirituality, doubt and fear naturally arises, and it's super super normal, and it usually has like a breaking point where it gets really big. And so how do we normalize that as you're stepping into a bigger frequency? Naturally, we start detoxing out the older frequencies that are more painful. So, a lot of it is to help people that are working through those things, working with certain emotions, really learn how to ride them out and kind of bringing in a higher frequency to those things and really normalizing it, because there's also this kind of like spiritual materialism that kind of comes through around like the spiritual path is like all this like beautiful sunshiny experience, and there is a lot of that, but there's a lot of detoxing, there's a lot of feeling your way through releasing things, and like how to be really real about that, but also how to not take it so seriously that we get so down like around it either, if that energy is coming through. So that's typically a lot of what my podcast focuses on. And I think the last one I did was on spiritual materialism and spiritual bypassing, a lot more of the Buddhist kind of context around that. But yeah, I do that. I've been meaning to do more. I'm just really busy. So I try to do it like once a month now. But I
Where can they find your podcast?
yeah, so it's on Apple, Spotify, Google, Soul Essence Center. It's on my website as well. And I'm more of a visual person, so I have some of the podcasts are actually on YouTube as well on there. But I have all the social medias, the Instagrams, the TikToks, the Pinterests, all that good stuff. But I do psychotherapy for folks in the state of Colorado. Just licensure wise, you can't unfortunately do psychotherapy out of the state. So I have a full practice of psychotherapy that I do. And then I do psychic medium readings, soul essence coaching for folks out of state and kind of all over the world. And I have these really cool programs that are designed for people that are sensitive and empathic, intuitive, to really kind of tap into the soul essence. I call it root energy medicine, because in order to really bring our spirit into the body, we have to really trust the body. And a lot of us have a lot of fear around how do I get into that space. So it's a really cool online course where someone learns these different energy healing tools at their own pace. They have about 90 days to do it, but there are weekly meetings with me and the entire Soul Essence community to practice together and to meet other people that are really trying to heal themselves. And so it sort of meets the introverts and the extroverts, right? Like you get to be extroverted if you want to be in community, but you get to be introverted like on your computer practicing meditations alone if you're like want to be more the monk in the cave situation there too.
That's really cool. That's really cool. That's
Mhm.
I think that's work that's definitely well needed in this in today's, day. Um
Mhm.
that's awesome. Listen, I don't want to keep you anymore. I didn't get to all my
Yeah.
questions. Fascinating conversation though. I'd love to have you back on sometime because I think
Oh,
you're a deep thinker, and everything you said really hit home, and it's I think it's good for the listeners. And I'm
mm.
gonna check out your podcast, and I think you probably got a new fan here because some of the stuff you're talking about's what I'm into. So it's
Oh,
good deal.
thank you, Dylan, so much for having this podcast. I can tell so much of what you offer is bringing the medicine to people that maybe you didn't have in a way, which is true courage and someone who's definitely bringing the medicine that we need on the planet. So thanks for having
That's
this space.
that's the goal. You're welcome. Thank you again. And where can the listeners one last time check you out, find your work, give them your website, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, all of it is located on my website at soulessencewellnesscenter.com.
Thanks again.
Thank you.